Now, throughout his moral crusade, as he was citing these examples of abusive treatment, Dr. Beecher did not tell us about his secret work for the U.S. intelligence community from 1947 to 1952, approximately. It may have started earlier and it may have run later, but those are the dates we know about. In September 1951, just 3 months after that seminal Montreal meeting with Henry Tizard and Dr. Hebb and CIA Representative Carol Haskins, Dr. Henry K. Beecher, the Dorr Professor of Anesthesiology at Harvard Medical School, crossed the Atlantic in the opposite direction, traveling through England and Germany to mobilize European scientists and U.S. intelligence officers in an exploration of the efficacy of truth serum, mescaline, and LSD-25 for interrogation. So obsessed was Beecher with advancing the use of drugs for interrogation that he had earlier obtained copies of Dr. Kurt Plotner's notorious reports of mescaline testing for the Gestapo at the Dachau death camp. Indeed, if you go to Dachau today and you look at the copies of Dr. Plotner's reports, those are actually from Beecher's files. He had the only extant copies of Dr. Plotner's reports. Let's review Professor Beecher's detailed 15-page report to the U.S. Army Surgeon General of his 1951 European tour. By the way, the U.S. Army Surgeon General, that's Lieutenant General Kevin Kiley today. This was Kiley's predecessor. Now, according to the report, in England, Beecher's first stop in 1951 involved discussions with senior medical researchers at Oxford and Cambridge about the utility of true serum, mescaline, and LSD to learn of, quote, their special value if many men are to be interrogated, end quote. Moving on to SHAPE, later NATO headquarters at Marly-le-Roi, Beecher had conversations about drugs and security with senior U.S. Army officers, of whom Beecher said, and I quote, they also expressed the view that since our work is supported by the Medical Research and Development Board, that the proper channel for its extension to useful levels was through the Joint Intelligence Committee rather than the Central Intelligence Agency, since the Central Intelligence Agency has representatives in any case on the Joint Intelligence Committee. At Heidelberg, Chief U.S. Surgeon for Europe, General Dennett, told Beecher, quote, that as a physician under the Geneva Convention, he, Dennett, could have nothing to do with the use of drugs for the purposes in mind and turned me over to G2, that's Army Intelligence. Consequently, U.S. Army G2 arranged Beecher to move into the heart of the interrogation effort at Oberwurstel, to the European Command Interrogation Center of the U.S. Army, where conversations with 6 top military and civil researchers concluded, said Beecher, that, quote, it would be desirable for me to return perhaps in a year when we know better the signs and symptoms of the newer derivatives of mescaline and lysergic acid to interrogate especially high-level escapees from Russian interrogation. While at Oberwurstel, the staff recommended that Beecher work with one General Schreiber, whom Beecher described as, quote, a physician and former German general who is now on his way to the United States and will be at the School of Aviation Medicine, Randolph Field. They thought Schreiber would be a good man for me to see and to interrogate. Schreiber is intelligent and helpful. So who was Schreiber, Beecher's putative research partner? Well, this was, of course, ex-Nazi General Walter Schreiber, former commander of the Wehrmacht Medical Corps and Nazi doctor who had conducted experiments on concentration camp prisoners during the war and been employed at Oberwurstel before the CIA brought him to the United States under Operation Paperclip, albeit only until May 1952, when press expose of his Nuremberg testimony about his war crimes forced the CIA to exfiltrate him to Argentina. Significantly, Oberwurstel was located in the Taunus Hills outside Frankfurt, and it was the site of the U.S. Army's Camp King, where former Nazi scientists, the Nazi doctors, including the notorious Deputy Reich health leader and Dachau Dr. Kurt Blum, were employed in POW interrogations, including fatal CIA experiments on these so-called expendables. A year later, in August 1952, Beecher did return to Europe where, after conversations with Army officers about LSD-25, he recommended strongly the study of, quote, of these agents as offensive weapons in, for example, city water supplies, reporting to Washington the implications of his own LSD experiments. Now listen carefully in Beecher's description of his own research to see if one of his priorities is concern for the subjects, okay? We need to know, for example, if ordinary chlorination of the water will oxidize the lysergic acid derivatives. In the doses we have been using, the maximum effect is obtained in about 2 hours after ingestion by mouth, and the duration of the effectiveness is about 6 hours. We need to know the effects of larger doses, of prolonged administration of small doses, and so on. These agents are being studied by some 200 investigators on both sides of the Iron Curtain. I earnestly hope the United States will not get behind in this field for want of an organized plan of attack. With Beecher's access to these secret interrogation facilities and his deep implication in this research, we must wonder about his role in the proliferating LSD experiments at Harvard, so cavalier in their treatment of human subjects, and more seriously, if he participated in or learned about the CIA's terminal experiments on so-called expendables, human subjects who were tortured to death at Camp King in Oberrussel and a nearby CIA safe house. During this 1951-52 period, therefore, Beecher's own account indicates that he had planned drug experimentation for interrogation with the U.S. intelligence community, tried to implicate reputable British scientists in possible criminal research, proposed drug testing that a senior U.S. Army surgeon considered criminal, visited the site of inhumane and sometimes murderous interrogation experiments at Oberrussel, eagerly sought out Nazi doctors and the fruits of their notorious Dachau experiments, and back home at Harvard, practiced LSD tests in heavy doses without concern for the human subjects. So what lesson might we draw from the career of Henry Clay Beecher, other than the importance of dying before your secret reports are declassified and disclosed to the public? Dr. Beecher can change from being the CIA's lead LSD researcher and the heir to the Nazi doctor's drug research into an ethical paragon for all American academics that any professional group can change. If members of the APA feel tainted by the work of their colleagues at Guantanamo and the ambiguous report of their professional association over these ethical lapses, then Beecher provides a shining path to ethical reform. Just as Beecher changed from what I call a neo-Nazi doctor to a moral paragon by embracing ethical standards, so the APA can change from a protector of Bush's psychological tortures by using its professional skills to define severe pain and psychological abuse in a revised Penn's report, an ethical standard, or above all, and I would argue that this is the responsibility of all psychotherapeutic professionals, revised the definition of these issues, particularly severe mental pain, in a revised DSM-4.